Looper is about a man that's trapped in a time loop in which he's destined to destroy himself. But the underlying story is about how we all face those same loops in our lives and how they can be a generational problem. So the question becomes, how do we break the loop? We're talking all about it this week in Caden's Movie Club. Spoilers ahead, so if you haven't seen it, beat it. The story takes place in two timelines, both in the future. The primary story is set in 2044, where we meet Joe, who makes a living as a looper. A looper is a special kind of assassin. By the year 2074, time travel has been invented and instantly outlawed. But for criminal organizations, the best way to get rid of an enemy is to send them back in time.
My employers in the future nabbed the target. They zap him back to me, so the target has vanished from the future. And I've just disposed of a body that technically does not exist.
Loopers get paid very well, and when they close their contract with the mob, they get an extra big payout. One that's supposed to last you for the next 30 years, but there's a reason for that. Time travel is so illegal that the mob wants to tie up all loose ends.
So if we're still alive 30 years from now, they'll find our older self, zap him back to us, and we'll kill him like any other job. This is called closing your loop.
So when a looper gets that golden payday that closes their contract, they know they just assassinated their future self. So we've already set up a dynamic here through our main character and the community he's a part of. These are self-destructive people, or he wouldn't agree to a deal in which he becomes his own demise. This is mirrored in the way we see Joe and the other loopers living. Everything is a temporary pleasure, even with the knowledge there will be consequences in the future. We've all made bad decisions that we regret later on. I'm sure most of us have experienced that moment where we wish we could go back in time and talk some sense into our earlier selves. And that's exactly the scenario this movie aims to deliver. When the time comes for Joe to close his loop, Joe's older self comes prepared and escapes. Thanks to a horrifying scene we saw earlier when Seth let his older self go, we know there are severe consequences. So now, Joe is both fleeing the mob and hunting his future self. Eventually, this leads to a face-to-face meeting in a diner. And this is where things get really interesting. In that fantasy scenario we've all had where we imagine correcting our past selves, I think we all assume our past selves would accept the wisdom of our future selves, but the reality is, we probably wouldn't.
This is my life now. I earned it. You had yours already. So why don't you do what old men do and die?
Because when we make self-destructive decisions, it's usually not out of real ignorance for the consequences. To some extent, we know what we're doing is harmful to ourselves and we do it anyway. This could apply to anything. It could be something as simple as procrastination or much more damaging behaviors.
Let's take a look at your life. Child mentality. What's mine? My life. Save your life. You're asking me how. The question's why.
It might be a little surprising how antagonistic these two characters are to each other when they're the same person, but maybe it shouldn't be. We also come to understand who this older version of Joe is. In a flashback scene, or technically a flash forward scene depending on how you look at it, we see this version of Joe close his loop. He gets his big payday, lives the high life, and runs out of money way too soon. So he turns back to the same lifestyle he had as a looper. The thing that finally allows him to change is meeting this woman. She saves him both literally and symbolically, but when the mob comes for him, she meets a tragic end. So when old Joe goes back in time, he's determined to stop that from ever happening. And the way he plans to do that is by taking out the Rainmaker. The Rainmaker is a mysterious, terrifying villain in older Joe's timeline and rules over the city through fear and violence. Part of that is closing all of the loops immediately, so Joe assumes if he takes out the young version of the Rainmaker, he can save his wife. Young Joe doesn't care about any of that. He just wants to take out old Joe so that he can fix this whole problem. He finds out where his older self will eventually go and gets there first. Which leads us to this farm where Sarah lives with her son Sid.
Who's that man?
He's just a vagrant baby.
No, he's not.
Oh, yeah?
His shoes are too shiny.
Aren't you a smart monkey?
The first half of the movie spends a lot of time setting up a web of plot points that start to come together in the second half, but it also sets up a big question. We've established that Joe is stuck in this self-destructive cycle, which is represented by a literal time loop. It seems to be an endless cycle of Joe choosing this life in which he eventually destroys himself. And when his older self tries to go back to change things, he can't actually do it. His younger self seems to be a completely different person that does not want the same things. But the truth is staring Joe right in the face. The reason he and his younger self don't agree is because they are the same person and he hasn't changed. And the thing they still share in common is that they're driven by selfishness. Older Joe claims he's trying to save his wife, but when young Joe offers to make sure she never gets harmed, older Joe refuses.
You got a picture right there on my watch? Let me see it. Show me the picture, and as soon as I see her, I'll walk away. If you give her up, she'll be safe.
Give her up?
Yeah, give her up. If she never meets you, she's safe.
You don't understand. We don't have to give her up.
When we see the lengths he'll go to achieve this goal, we recognize how selfish it really is. So even though old Joe has come back to try and rewrite the past, he hasn't really changed, and therefore, he can't change his younger self. The big question that we then might be asking is, why is Joe like this? Why are all the loopers like this? And how can it be fixed? And it's here that we start to see what the movie really wants to address, this idea of damaged, self-destructive people and why they ended up that way. And this story proposes that it has everything to do with who did or didn't take care of us. This idea is planted early in the movie in several subtle ways, when Joe nearly runs into this kid in the street alone with nobody looking after him. Or when Seth is frozen because his future self starts singing a lullaby that their mother sang when they were a child. Even the dynamic between Abe and Kid Blue throughout the movie resembles a dysfunctional father-son relationship. We can immediately see this is not a healthy relationship, and we come to find out that Abe essentially raised Joe as well.
You were the youngest looper I ever hired. The bad version of your life, like a vision. I could see how you'd turn bad. So I changed it.
Joe's mother died when he was young, and he was taken in by Abe, who channeled Joe's pain to be an effective tool for the mob. We soon come to find out that Sid is the Rainmaker, and the reason he's so dangerous in the future is that he has extremely powerful telekinetic abilities. When young Joe finds out about this, for a moment, he agrees with old Joe. Wouldn't it be better for everyone if this kid never grew up to become the Rainmaker? But when Joe goes to act on this, he doesn't see a future villain, he just sees what Sid is now, a scared, confused kid. When Sarah had Sid, she was living that self-destructive lifestyle, so she left him with her sister on the farm. When her sister died, she came to raise her son, but Sid had already come to view the sister as his mother. So in his mind, he's already lost his parental figure. He doesn't trust Sarah no matter how much she tries to love him. So it seems inevitable at this point that Sid will become the Rainmaker, but the truth is, he's at a crossroads.
I've seen so many men in the city who I look in their eyes and they're just lost. So whether he loves me back or not, as long as I'm there to raise him, he's gonna be taken care of.
Sarah believes if she's there to love and care for him, that the future may not be set. Seeing how his own life has turned out by watching his older self, Joe comes to agree. And toward the end of the movie, we see just how much of a loop, or a cycle, this whole process of self-destruction really is. In trying to stop the Rainmaker from existing, older Joe is actually the one that creates the Rainmaker. Because older Joe is willing to sacrifice anything to save his wife, he's going to take out Sarah while he's trying to get to Sid. And this is actually the moment that Sid becomes the person that will eventually be the Rainmaker. The moment where the person that was meant to love and take care of him is taken away.
Then I saw it. A boy, angry and alone, laid out in front of him, the bad path. I saw it. And the path was a circle.
And younger Joe sees it clearly. It may not have been his fault that he became the way he is. He was abandoned as a child and raised without love. But now he sees himself perpetuating the cycle of self-destruction that all begins with not being loved. This is the real loop. And Joe realizes if he makes the most selfless decision possible, the loop can be changed.
So I changed it.
In the ultimate self-sacrifice, Joe does what he was always planning to do. He destroys his future self, but this time, it has an entirely different meaning. Instead of perpetuating a cycle, Joe breaks the loop entirely by preventing it from even happening. He stops himself from becoming that person. Now, I want to be clear, I don't think this movie is advocating for us to do what Joe does to himself. In the grand scheme of our loop analogy, I do think it's saying that when we hurt ourselves, we hurt the next generation as well. And to stop the cycle, we have to make a selfless decision.
Where's Joe?
Go away, baby.
We have to break our loops, and that might mean that we need to destroy our old selves in an act of selflessness. Then we can turn that selflessness onto the next generation and change the loop into one of compassion and love. And next week, we're going to take a look at a movie that also uses time travel to examine love in every possible way. Romantic love, familial love, and love of life. About Time follows the story of Tim, a young man who finds out that the men in his family have the ability to go back in time. The specific rules in this version of time travel are that they can only travel back to moments they have lived before. So there's no possibility of going back to stop world tragedies or anything like that. They can only use it in their own lives. Again, that fantasy scenario comes back to us, what if I could have do-overs in life? And here's some questions to keep in mind while you watch. What do you think about the way in which Tim uses his abilities? Would you use them the same way, or would you choose different priorities? How does your perspective shift throughout the movie? When Tim learns about the potential consequences of his time travel, what do you think this is saying about the way in which we sometimes fantasize about changing the past? What do you think this movie is ultimately saying about the idea of having do-overs in life? What is so valuable about the nature of time? So let's chat about Looper in the comments, and I'll see you back here next Sunday to discuss about time. And if you want to stay in the know about Movie Club, you know where to go.